The chandelier above, a constellation of crystal teardrops, hangs motionless in the cavernous silence of the auditorium. Below it the air is thick, not with dust, but with the sediment of expectation. Rows of velvet seats are occupied by individuals who have traveled through rain, through traffic, and through the wearying cadence of their own private struggles to be here, in this specific coordinates of space and time. To the casual observer, the room is a collection of bodies. A man in a charcoal suit crossing his legs, a woman in a silk blouse tracing the rim of her coffee cup, a young professional staring intensely at the glowing screen of a device that keeps him tethered to a world he is trying to escape. But look closer, move past the epidermis, past the tailoring of their clothes, past the surface-level expressions of boredom or polite anticipation. If one were to possess a lens capable of perceiving the invisible architecture of human presence, the room would not look like a gathering of individuals at all. It would look like a collision of distinct, warring universes. One person radiates the brittle, translucent hope of a candle flame flickering in a gale. Another is encased in a leaden suit of skepticism, the kind that has been dented by too many false promises and now serves as a fortress against further disappointment. There are those leaning forward, hearts open like parched earth, craving the first drop of rain, and those leaning back, arms crossed as if to hold their very souls together against the possibility of being moved. They believe they are here to hear a speaker. They believe they are here to consume information, to be entertained, or perhaps to find a reprieve from the relentless friction of their daily existence. They are mistaken. The paradox of the human condition is that we move through the world believing we are observers of an objective reality, when in truth, we are nothing more than the inhabitants of our own internal rooms. We carry these rooms with us like nomadic ghosts. We step into the boardroom, the bedroom, or the sanctuary, and we do not see the room as it is, we see the room as we are. The light is the same, the dimensions are the same, yet for one, it is a hall of opportunity, and for the other, it is a cage of confinement. Before a single word is uttered, before the first note of wisdom is struck, the entire trajectory of this evening has already been written. It was written in the quiet, unseen, and often unconscious state of mind that each guest carried through the door. Welcome to the only reality that matters, the architecture of your own being. To understand the mechanics of existence, one must first dismantle the illusion of the external world. The common perception suggests that we are sentient beings reacting to a solid, immovable stage. We believe that if the economy falters, we are right to be anxious. If a partner leaves, we are right to be heartbroken. If the body fails, we are right to be afraid. This is the great mechanical error of the human mind. The principle is this: you are in a state, you always will be in a state. The moment you know what state you are in, you can choose to leave it. What then is a state of consciousness? It is not a fleeting mood. A mood is a passing cloud. A state is the climate. It is a coherent, self-sustaining configuration of your internal apparatus. Think of it as a complete ecosystem of thought, feeling, assumption, and expectation that has solidified into a way of being. When you occupy a state, you are not merely thinking thoughts, you are thinking from them. They become the tinted glass through which you perceive the entirety of the universe. Why is this so difficult for the modern mind to grasp? Because the modern mind is addicted to the primacy of the sensory. We are trained to trust the testimony of our five senses above all else. We treat the material world as the original and our inner life as the copy. But if we apply recursive thinking, we find the inverse is true. If we ask why the world appears indifferent to our desires, the answer is that the world is not indifferent. It is merely a mirror. It is a high-fidelity echo chamber. The world is a responsive field of existence that lacks the capacity for opinion, malice, or favor. It has no agenda other than to reflect the inner state that is projected upon it. If you are experiencing a life of limitation, it is not because the world has denied you. It is because you have occupied the state of the limited person for so long that you have forgotten you are the one behind the dial. How does one occupy a state? It is a subtle, almost imperceptible alignment. It happens when you assume a truth about yourself. When you say, I am unlucky. You are not just describing a sequence of events. You are aligning your inner configuration with the frequency of misfortune. You are setting your internal radio dial to a station where the music of failure is the only thing broadcast. Your mind, an incredibly efficient pattern recognition engine, then begins to filter the vast, infinite ocean of data around you to find only the evidence that confirms your suspicion. You find the traffic, the slight from a colleague, the financial setback. You point to these and say, "See, I told you I was unlucky." You have essentially become the architect of your own entrapment, using the raw materials of reality to build a prison cell, then complaining about the lack of sunlight. True transformation requires the courage to acknowledge that you are not the victim of the film playing on the screen. You are the projectionist. And as a projectionist, you have the radical, frightening, and magnificent freedom to reach into the booth and change the real. Consider the story of Elias, a man who spent his life in the Valley of Almost. Elias was a craftsman, a woodcarver of exquisite talent. His shop was filled with intricate, breathing masterpieces, birds that looked ready to take flight, bowls that felt like liquid silk. Yet, year after year, Elias sat in the shadow of his own obscurity. He would wake before the sun, his heart heavy with the weight of the day's predicted failure. He walked to his shop with his shoulders hunched, not under the weight of the wood, but under the assumption of his own invisibility. "No one wants what I create," he would mutter to the dust motes dancing in the morning light. "The world is too busy, too shallow, too preoccupied to notice the detail of my labor." When a customer entered, Elias spoke with an apologetic tone, as if his very presence were an imposition. He offered his carvings with a downcast gaze, his speech laced with a subtle, self-deprecating humor that served as a shield against the rejection he expected. He was living in the state of the unappreciated artist. His workshop was a vacuum of recognition. One afternoon, a stranger stopped by a man of quiet intensity who looked not at the carvings, but at Elias. The stranger asked, "Why do you treat your work as if it were a beggar's bread?" Elias blinked, confused. "Because that is what the market demands. My bank account is a testament to the lack of demand." The stranger smiled and placed a heavy, weathered hand on the workbench. "You are looking at the reflection and trying to carve it into something new. You cannot carve the reflection. You must change the subject. Tell me, if you were already the master you pretend you are not, how would you walk? How would you hold your tools? How would you look at the person who holds your art in their hands?" Elias spent the next week in a state of deliberate internal revolt. He stopped thinking about the market. He stopped checking the register. Instead, he practiced the state of the valued creator. He stood straighter. He cleaned the workbench until it gleamed, treating it not as a place of struggle, but as a throne of craft. He stopped apologizing. When he spoke of his art, he spoke with the calm authority of a man who knows he has enriched the world. He didn't fake it. He simply shifted his internal residence. He moved from the basement of doubt to the attic of conviction. Within a month, the shift was unmistakable. It wasn't that the town had changed. It was that Elias had. When he greeted a customer now, his presence occupied the room. He was no longer a beggar asking for a sale. He was a master sharing a vision. People felt the shift. They didn't know why they were suddenly drawn to his shop. They only knew that the energy radiating from this man was different. It was magnetic. It was grounded. It was undeniable. Elias hadn't changed his wood. He had changed the world's perception of it by changing his own state of consciousness. He had stopped asking for permission to exist and started existing from a state of total inward completion. As you sit here, with these words settling into the quiet corners of your mind, you are faced with a choice. You can remain the person who views their life as a series of circumstances that happen to you, or you can become the person who recognizes the state you currently inhabit. To begin this work, you do not need to alter your circumstances today. You do not need to quit your job, pack your bags, or force a grand transformation. You only need to practice the art of the internal audit. Throughout your day, I invite you to pause. In the midst of the noise, the clutter, and the demands, stop for a single heartbeat. Ask yourself, what state am I in right now? Are you in the state of the struggling person who feels the weight of the world? Are you in the state of the anxious architect who is trying to force the future to arrive on your timeline? Or are you in the state of the conscious creator who knows that the internal climate determines the harvest? Do not judge what you find. If you find yourself in a state of frustration, simply note it. I am in the state of frustration. By merely naming it, you create a microscopic, beautiful distance between your awareness and the emotion. You cease to be the frustration. You become the observer of the frustration. And once you see it, you have the power to step out of it. Like and subscribe if you are ready to dismantle the architecture of your past. But there is a danger in this freedom, a shadow that clings to the heels of every great realization. Many believe that shifting their state is as simple as a wish, failing to realize that the world has a way of testing the integrity of our new foundation. You have heard the phrase, the law of attraction, but you have likely never heard the full, brutal, and beautiful truth of the mechanism that governs it. In our next chapter, we will strip away the myths of positive thinking and step into the fire of the great inversion. We will explore why the world seems to fight back when you try to change, and how you can use that resistance as the very ladder that carries you to a new reality. The room is ready. The dial is in your hand. The question is no longer what you can have, but who you are brave enough to be. We shall meet in the next chapter, where the illusion of the outside finally dissolves. Imagine a man standing before a vast, ornate mirror in a dimly lit hallway. He is dressed in rags, his posture a symphony of defeat, his eyes downcast, tracing the cracks in the floorboards. He looks into the glass and sees a pauper. He sees the frayed collar, the smudge of dirt on his cheek, the hollow look of a man who has surrendered to the whims of fortune. Driven by a sudden, jagged urge for change, he reaches out, his fingers trembling, and tries to scrub the dirt off the glass. He presses his palms against the cold surface, pleading with the reflection to stand straighter, to smile, to wear a king's mantle. He scrubs until his knuckles are raw, yet the reflection remains a pauper. He cries out, accusing the mirror of malice, of being a cruel, distorting agent that insists on showing him only his misery. He believes the mirror is the enemy, the objective judge of his worth, the absolute authority that dictates his reality. He does not realize that the reflection is not an independent actor. It is in effect a delayed, faithful echo. The man is not the prisoner of the mirror, he is the source of the image. The moment he continues to believe the mirror is the judge, he remains trapped in a loop of his own creation. This is the central paradox of human experience. We live our entire lives trying to fix the reflection, wasting our precious vitality in a desperate, futile war against the shadow. All while the substance, the object standing before the glass, remains neglected, ignored, and unchanged. The world around you is not a monolith of objective facts. It is a vast, silvered surface, waiting to receive your image. When you walk through life reacting to your bank account, your relationships, or your health as if they were the primary reality, you are merely a man scrubbing at the glass, wondering why the image refuses to change. But observe the silence between these words. Realize that the power to alter the reflection does not lie in the glass. It lies in the terrifying, beautiful simplicity of the pivot. To grasp the great inversion, one must engage in a rigorous excavation of the ego's most cherished belief, the conviction that the external world is the cause and the internal world is the effect. This belief is the anchor of the unconscious life. It is the dogma that says, I am unhappy because my circumstances are difficult. Let us subject this to the light of recursive thinking. Why do we cling to this? Because it absolves us of responsibility. If our inner state is merely a response to the real world, then we are innocent victims of destiny. It is a comfortable, albeit devastating, arrangement. How does this mechanism operate? It functions through the law of sympathetic resonance. Every state of consciousness carries a specific frequency. When you inhabit the state of struggle, you are emitting a signal into the field of infinite potentiality, because the universe is inherently law-bound and impersonal. As gravity does not care if you are a king or a beggar, when you jump from a cliff, the field must respond in kind. It gathers the discordant circumstances that match your internal frequency and presents them to you as objective reality. You see the struggle, you feel the struggle, and you conclude, see, reality is struggling. You have inverted the sequence. The struggle did not produce your state. Your state produced the struggle. This is not mere psychology. It is the fundamental physics of consciousness. The why of this is rooted in the architecture of the creative power. If the universe were to respond to your surface-level desires, your superficial prayers or fleeting wishes, while your deep-seated assumptions remained rooted in lack, the result would be chaos. The universe, in its infinite, cold precision, responds only to the assumption, the root-level state of being. Ask yourself, how can I claim to want abundance when my internal dialogue, my physical posture, and my subconscious assumptions are vibrating at the frequency of scarcity? The universe cannot hear your words. It only perceives your vibration. The inversion is the shift from seeing yourself as the move to the mover. You are the primary cause. Every problem you face is a lagging effect, a ghost of a state you occupied seconds, days, or years ago. The rigorous truth is this: nothing in your external world has the power to change you. Nothing. The world is a silent, unopinionated canvas. It is entirely passive. It only appears active because you are constantly projecting your inner state upon it, and then mistaking the projection for an autonomous entity. To master the great inversion, you must withdraw your authority from the outer world. You must cease asking it for validation. You must stop waiting for the mirror to look better before you decide to stand tall. In the high, wind-swept hills of the old world lived a merchant named Silas. Silas possessed a fleet of ships, but for years the winds had turned against him. His ledger was a graveyard of losses, and his home, once a place of laughter, had grown cold, the halls echoing with the stifled anxiety of his creditors. Silas spent his days in the harbor, watching the horizon, his face etched with the lines of a man waiting for a storm that never ended. He blamed the shifting currents, the betrayal of his captains, and the rising cost of silk. Every morning, he went to the harbor and measured his worth by the emptiness of the docks. He lived in the state of the diminishing man. One evening, he encountered an aged mapmaker who had traveled the farthest reaches of the known world. Silas poured out his grievances, detailing how the world had conspired to ruin him. The mapmaker listened, his eyes calm, until Silas had exhausted his catalogue of woes. "Silas," the mapmaker said, "you describe the sea as if it were your master. You talk of winds and tides as if they dictate the profit in your coffers. Tell me, if you were the wealthiest merchant in the 7 seas, would you be standing here at the harbor, trembling at the sight of an empty dock?" "No," Silas replied, bewildered. "I would be preparing for the next cargo." "And if you were that man," the mapmaker pressed, "how would you carry yourself? Would you spend your dawn hours mourning, or would you breathe the salt air as if the ocean already belonged to you?" Silas looked at the water. It was the same water it had been for years, but he realized, with a shock that felt like ice water on his skin, that he had been approaching the harbor as a man who had already failed. He had been broadcasting failure to the winds, and the winds had simply carried that signal back to him. That night, Silas did not check his ledgers. He did not pace. He sat in his study and, with his eyes closed, he inhabited the state of the merchant who had arrived. He felt the phantom weight of gold in his belt. He smelled the phantom scent of spices from far-off lands. He felt the solid, unshakable confidence of a man whose success was not a hope, but a memory of the future. He walked into that state and he refused to leave it. He did not pretend. He made it his residence. For weeks, the docks remained empty. His creditors grew louder. The world outside the mirror showed no change. But Silas did not falter. He lived as the merchant, not the pauper. He carried himself with such terrifying, quiet confidence that his own servants began to walk with a new purpose. His captains, sensing a shift in the air of his command, began to suggest routes they had previously dismissed as impossible. 1 month later, the winds shifted. A storm in the far north drove 3 merchant ships, lost and seeking harbor, into Silas's port. They carried a fortune in goods that were desperately needed in the capital. Silas did not view this as luck. He viewed it as the inevitable, mathematical consequence of the state he had inhabited. The external world had been forced to conform to the inner state he had refused to abandon. The great inversion is not a philosophy to be discussed. It is a law to be practiced. Today, you are invited to apply this law to the most stubborn aspect of your life, that one problem you have been trying to solve by scrubbing at the mirror. Do not try to change the situation today. Instead, observe your internal posture. When you think of that problem, what is your state? Are you fearful, hoping, or reaching? These are the states of the lack dweller. They keep the problem firmly in place because they acknowledge it as a sovereign reality. To invert this, perform the silent act. Sit for 10 minutes and cultivate the state of the person for whom that problem no longer exists. Do not visualize the how. Do not plan. Simply feel the relief, the lightness, and the certainty of the person who is already on the other side of that mountain. If you desire peace, do not fight the chaos. Occupy the state of the peaceful one until the chaos becomes a distant, irrelevant hum. If you feel the urge to check the external results, stop. Remind yourself, the mirror has not caught up yet. Hold the state. Persistence is the bridge between the inner reality and the material manifestation. Subscribe and turn on notifications, not to follow a guide, but to keep your frequency aligned. You are not just a viewer, you are a participant in the unfolding of a new reality. But be warned, once you commit to this, the world will test you. It will show you evidence of the old state with such intensity that your logical mind will scream in protest, demanding that you return to the realistic path. Why does the world throw these final, frantic hurdles in your way? And how can you distinguish between a genuine dead end and the final, beautiful trial before your manifestation takes physical form? The answers are hidden in the mechanics of the crucible, and we will confront them in the next chapter. The stage is set. The actor is ready. Will you hold the position, or will you blink? The cathedral of the city is not built of stone, but of invisible currents. It is a bustling railway station at the peak of the evening rush. Observe the architecture of this movement. Thousands of souls intersect in a chaotic dance of motion, yet no two people occupy the same experiential reality. A man in a frayed coat rushes toward the platform, his brow furrowed, his eyes scanning the crowd with a predator's alertness for danger. The pickpocket, the missed train, the crushing disappointment of a delayed arrival. He moves as if the world is a hostile obstacle course. He bumps into a woman, mumbles a jagged apology, and continues, his vibration low and static heavy. 3 feet away, a woman walks with a rhythmic, unhurried grace. She is breathing, truly breathing, and the crowd seems to part for her, not because she is pushy, but because her internal frequency is so calm, so centered, that it creates a gentle displacement in the field. She enters the same station, walks past the same advertisements, hears the same screeching brakes, yet she exists in a state of quiet wonder. To her, the city is a symphony of opportunity. To the man in the coat, it is a gauntlet of survival. They are standing on the same floor, breathing the same air, yet they inhabit entirely different dimensions of consciousness. If you were to peer into the space between them, you would see the shimmer of the invisible radio waves, the frequency of their inner state broadcasting a signal into the responsive field. The man is tuned to the frequency of lack, and his receiver is picking up every song of scarcity, every note of friction, every discordant sound in the environment. The woman is tuned to the frequency of abundance, and her receiver is filtering the exact same environment to hear only the harmony, the beauty, and the infinite possibilities. The world is not a collection of objects, it is a buffet of frequencies. What you receive depends entirely on where you have set your dial. To master the frequency of being, one must confront the profound, often uncomfortable truth of our internal telecommunications. We believe we are perceiving the world, when in fact, we are tuning it. Why is our perception so radically different from our neighbors? It is because the human mind is a specialized filter. It does not record reality, it edits reality. How does this editing process function? It functions through the reticular activating system of the psyche, which is governed by the state we habitually occupy. If you ask, why do I only see the problems in my life? The answer is simple. Your internal frequency is locked onto the station of inadequacy. The universe is a vast, infinite broadcast of all possible outcomes. Every version of you, every success, every failure, every joy, every catastrophe exists simultaneously in the field of consciousness. This is not a metaphor. It is the fundamental nature of the implicate order. The how of tuning is an act of subconscious selection. Just as a radio tuner must ignore the static to find the clear signal of the station, your consciousness must disregard the static of sensory evidence to find the frequency of your desire. Most people fail because they are radio flippers. They spend 5 minutes on the station of abundance, feel a surge of hope, then flip back to the station of lack the moment they see a bill on the counter or hear a discouraging word. They live in the static, and then they wonder why their lives sound like a screeching, distorted mess. Recursively, we must ask, why do we keep returning to the station of lack? Because it is familiar. The human ego is addicted to the known. Even if the known is a hell of struggle, it is a comfortable hell because it is predictable. To tune into a new frequency, the frequency of success, of love, of health, is to step into the unknown. It requires the courage to hear the silence where the noise used to be, and to trust that your desired frequency is waiting, even if your physical ears haven't caught the melody yet. When you embody a state, you are not trying to change the broadcast. You are changing the receiver. You are the only person who holds the dial. And the most dangerous trap in the journey of consciousness is the belief that you are a passive listener. You are not listening to the world. The world is listening to the frequency you are currently emitting. In the ancient province of Oakhaven, there were two sisters, Clara and Elena. They were born of the same parents, raised in the same house, and endowed with the same talents. Yet their lives grew to be as different as the rising sun and the setting moon. Clara lived in the frequency of the searching. She was always looking for something she felt she lacked. She moved through the woods looking for the perfect blossom, yet she always found the ones that had been bruised by the frost. She sat by the stream, but she focused only on the muddy banks, never noticing the silver minnows darting in the clear center. She spent her days in a state of vigilant inquiry. When will I find peace? When will I find prosperity? Because her dial was set to searching, she lived in a state of perpetual not yet. The universe provided her with exactly what she broadcast, more things to search for. Elena, however, lived in the frequency of the inhabiting. She walked the same woods, but her eyes were tuned to the vibrant, unfolding life. She noticed the way the moss blanketed the rocks in velvet green. She heard the hidden song of the birds deep in the canopy. She didn't search for peace. She walked as if she were made of it. One day, a great drought struck Oakhaven. The wells dried up and the soil cracked. Clara ran to the edge of the parched land, crying out to the sky, "There is no water. We are doomed. My lack is confirmed." She broadcasted a signal of terror and scarcity so loudly that she could not hear the secret whisper of the earth. She paced the perimeter of the dried well, her energy chaotic, her frequency locked into a death spiral. Elena walked to the same parched land. She sat quietly, closing her eyes. She did not broadcast the drought. She tuned her inner frequency to the memory of the subterranean rivers, to the cool, deep truth of the water that always remained beneath the surface. She inhabited the frequency of the aquifer. She felt the coolness in her own marrow. She didn't look at the cracked mud. She looked through it to the life that was sustaining itself in the depths. 3 days later, a traveler arrived, disoriented and exhausted. He came to Elena, not Clara, for he felt drawn to the coolness that seemed to radiate from her presence. "I have heard of a hidden spring in these hills," he said. "I am lost, but my internal map tells me it is nearby." Elena smiled. She led him not to a new place, but to the exact spot where Clara had been pacing in despair. She showed him how to listen to the vibration of the earth. They dug a few feet, and the water, cool, clear, and abundant, began to gush forth. Clara had been staring at the same spot for days, but her frequency of lack had blinded her to the reality of the spring. Elena, by inhabiting the frequency of abundance, had made the invisible visible. The spring didn't appear because Elena was magical. It appeared because she was tuned to the station where the spring had always been. The frequency of your being is the master key to your external world. You have been walking through your life with a dial that has been stuck on default, conditioned by your past, your fears, and the loud, discordant songs of the world around you. Today, we begin the process of deliberate tuning. This is your practical exercise for the next 24 hours. The atmospheric shift. Whenever you find yourself in a situation that triggers the old, familiar frequency of lack or frustration, a difficult email, a crowded commute, a moment of doubt, do not react. Stop. Take 3 deliberate, slow breaths. This is your dial reset. In that moment of stillness, ask yourself, what is the frequency of the version of me who has already solved this? Is that person anxious? No, they are steady. Are they hurried? No. They are fluid. Are they defensive? No. They are expansive. Shift your internal posture to match that frequency. You don't have to feel it perfectly. You only need to simulate the posture of the person who exists on that station. Breathe, straighten your shoulders, and speak from that place. You are broadcasting a new signal into the field. Observe how the situation begins to shift around you. The emails you get will be more helpful. The people you encounter will be more cooperative. The field must match your frequency. If this resonance is finding a home in your heart, like and subscribe. By doing so, you are explicitly declaring your commitment to tune your life to a higher frequency. But there is a catch. The moment you begin to shift your frequency, you will notice a strange phenomenon. The world around you will resist. It will try to pull you back to the static you are trying to leave. It will seem as if reality itself is attempting to recalibrate you to your old, limited self. Why does the universe seem to protect the status quo? And how can you stand firm when the evidence of your life is screaming that you are delusional? We are approaching the threshold of the great crucible. In our next chapter, we will reveal the secret to holding your frequency even when the world burns around you. The signal is clearing, but the hardest part of the transmission is about to begin. Are you ready to hold the line? The desert night is a vast, ink-washed velvet, studded with stars that seem like cold, distant thoughts of a slumbering god. A lone wanderer sits by a fire that has dwindled to a pulsing heart of crimson embers. The wind whispers across the dunes, carrying the scent of ancient dust and the silence of aeons. In this solitude, there is no one to witness the wanderer, no one to demand a performance, no one to cast judgment upon his rags or his exhaustion. He is entirely alone with the architecture of his own soul. He closes his eyes and speaks 2 words into the abyss. They are not words of supplication. They are not words of hope. They are not words of negotiation. They are the most profound, most dangerous, and most creative words in the vocabulary of existence. I am. At the sound of these words, the atmosphere seems to shift, as if the very fabric of the cosmos leans in to listen. It is a command, an incision into the infinite. When he says, I am, he is not describing a state he occupies. He is defining the boundary of his own universe. He is setting the coordinates of his existence. If he follows those words with tired, he creates a life of exhaustion. If he follows them with defeated, he invites the crushing weight of failure. But if he follows them with blessed, the stars themselves seem to rearrange their patterns to accommodate his declaration. The paradox of the human experience is that we spend our lives reciting these 2 words as if they were conclusions based on the world around us. We say, I am broke, because we look at an empty wallet. We say, I am lonely, because we look at an empty chair. We believe we are stating a fact. We do not realize that we are issuing a decree. We are the creators, yet we act as if we are the puppets. We are the ones holding the pen, yet we treat the story as if it were a tragedy written by someone else. The desert knows the truth. The universe does not hear what you want. It only echoes what you declare yourself to be. To understand the mechanics of the I am command, one must first dismantle the ego's attachment to the secondary. Most human suffering is the result of placing the cart before the horse, of believing that the I is a response to the environment. Why is this the ultimate creative power? Because I am is the only statement that possesses the potency of the eternal present. The past is a memory. The future is a fantasy. Neither has the creative force to shape reality. Only the I am, the conscious awareness currently experiencing the present moment, is the portal through which the creative energy of the universe flows. How does this work? It operates through the mechanism of objectification. When you say I am X, you are not just labeling yourself. You are giving an instruction to the responsive field of existence. The field, which is essentially the underlying, malleable substance of reality, has no inherent form. It waits for the directive of your consciousness to take shape. Your consciousness acts as a sculptor, and the words I am are the chisel that strikes the stone. If we recursively analyze the process, we encounter a fundamental question: why do we consistently use this power to create our own limitation? The answer lies in the comfort of identification. To say I am limited is to absolve the soul of the burden of expansion. It is a form of spiritual suicide, a way of retreating from the terrifying potentiality of being a god in human form. We would rather be a victim of a cruel world than the master of a reality we are responsible for shaping. The how of correcting this lies in the discipline of the internal dialogue. You must learn to police the gates of your own consciousness. Every time you think I am, stop. Examine what follows. Are you affirming your own power, or are you confirming your own chains? The creative power does not distinguish between a positive and a negative declaration. It simply takes the I am and turns it into a lived reality. If you say, I am struggling, the universe says, as you wish. If you say, I am the master of my own state, the universe says, as you wish. This is the most dangerous knowledge, for it renders all excuses obsolete. Once you recognize that you are the one speaking the world into existence, you can no longer blame the external circumstances for your state. You are left with only the responsibility of your own declaration. You must learn to speak as if your word is the law, because in the architecture of your reality, it is. In the bustling capital of a great, sprawling empire lived a scribe named Julian. Julian was a man of immense intellect but negligible status. He spent his days transcribing the decrees of the emperor, watching as men rose and fell on the strength of a single royal seal. Julian felt himself to be a prisoner of his birth, his station, and his mediocre prospects. He frequently walked through the marketplace, muttering, I am a man of no consequence. I am destined to labor in the shadow of others. He viewed his life as a fixed script, a scroll that had been written by the gods before he was born. He was, in his own mind, a secondary character in someone else's epic. One evening, while organizing the royal archives, he stumbled upon an ancient, forbidden text that spoke of the voice of the Creator. The text suggested that the emperor's power did not come from his throne, but from his capacity to hold a specific state and declare it into reality. It stated, "The king is not he who wears the crown. The king is he who occupies the state of the king." Julian, driven by a desperate, quiet hunger for more, decided to conduct an experiment. He would not change his job. He would not ask for a promotion. He would simply change the suffix of his identity. Every morning, before the sun rose, Julian sat in the silence of the library. He breathed deeply, letting the silence settle into his bones. He would whisper, "I am not the scribe. I am the architect of my own fortune." He repeated this until the words ceased to be a description and began to feel like a truth. He felt the weight of his own authority. He moved through his day not as a servant, but as a man whose presence had value. When he spoke with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who already held the keys to the future. He stopped seeking approval from his superiors. He began to offer suggestions not because he needed to be noticed, but because he saw a better way. And a man who believes he is an architect of fortune naturally seeks efficiency. His co-workers, confused, began to treat him differently. They didn't know why, but they felt compelled to listen to him. When the emperor's chief minister fell ill, it was Julian who was asked to draft the critical policy document purely because the air around him seemed charged with the capability of a man who belonged in a higher station. Julian's rise was not a series of strokes of luck. It was the mathematical inevitability of his new declaration. He had spent years broadcasting, "I am of no consequence," and the world had confirmed it. He spent 6 months broadcasting, "I am the architect," and the world had no choice but to provide the tools for his construction. He hadn't changed the empire, he had changed the emperor within himself. The power of the I am is the most accessible, yet the most overlooked instrument in your reality. It is not an esoteric secret, it is the fundamental mechanism of your waking life. Today, you are to undertake the watchman's discipline. For the next 12 hours, become the silent observer of your internal dialogue. Every time your mind offers a definition of yourself, catch it. If you catch yourself saying, "I am tired," immediately flip it, "I am energetic, renewed by the power of my own attention." If you catch yourself thinking, "I am overwhelmed," correct it, "I am the calm center of this activity." Do not force this as a mantra to be mindlessly repeated. Speak it with the weight of a decree. Feel the truth of the statement in your chest. When you say, "I am," you are essentially invoking the creative force of the universe to manifest the reality that follows. Treat your words with the reverence of a king signing a treaty. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You are currently building a new foundation, and the structural integrity of your life depends on your commitment to this new language. But there is a final, hidden challenge. Even when you are declaring your new identity, the old reality will still be playing out. The momentum of your past declarations will continue to show up in your life, masquerading as your present. It is here that most people falter, mistaking the dying echoes of their old self for the birth of a new reality. They lose their nerve at the very moment of victory. We are arriving at the threshold where the identity of the past struggles against the identity of the future. In our next chapter, we will master the art of living from the end, ensuring that your new declaration takes root even when the world is screaming the opposite. The command has been issued. Now, we must learn how to rule the empire of our own awareness. We meet in the shadow of the old self, where the new reality is born. Imagine, if you will, a grand, labyrinthine mansion that spans not the physical plane, but the infinite expanse of the human psyche. It is a structure of impossible geometry, containing countless rooms, each adorned with the artifacts of our experiences, our regrets, our triumphs, and our fears. The lighting in this mansion is not external. It is projected from the very essence of the one who walks its halls. You find yourself standing in the grand foyer, surrounded by 1,000 doors. Some are bathed in the golden, honeyed light of nostalgic joy. Others are cloaked in the cold, blue shadows of anxiety. Many are locked, veiled in the thick dust of forgotten dreams. The paradox of our existence is that we possess the keys to every single one of these rooms, yet we spend our lives huddled in the doorway of a single cramped closet, believing that we are restricted by the architecture itself. We walk through our days like sleepwalkers in our own home, bumping into the furniture of our past, bruising ourselves against the walls of our own habit, never pausing to realize that we are the master of this estate. The air in these rooms is stagnant, heavy with the scent of unexamined assumptions. We believe we are in the reality room when, in truth, we are merely in the room of worry, and we have been there so long that we have begun to mistake the peeling wallpaper for the horizon. Listen closely. The sounds of the house are not external, they are the reverberations of our own internal posture. The creak of the floorboards, the draft under the door, the sudden chill of the hallway, these are not manifestations of an objective world, but the atmospheric conditions of the specific room we have chosen to inhabit. We are the architects, the caretakers, and the prisoners all at once. The question is not whether the mansion is vast. The question is, why do you insist on living in the basement? To navigate the geography of consciousness, one must first accept a reality that the ego finds deeply offensive. We are not victims of our environment, we are victims of our own familiarity. Why do we remain in rooms that no longer serve us? It is because the human psyche finds a perverse comfort in the architecture of the known. Even a room defined by sorrow is known, and therefore it feels safer than the vast, terrifyingly beautiful potential of an unknown room. We would rather suffer in the state of the struggler than risk the unfamiliar, silent expanse of the successful one. Familiarity acts as a gravity, pulling us back into our habitual patterns with a force that feels like destiny. How does this habituation solidify into an identity? It functions through the recursive loop of the affirmation of the familiar. Every day, you wake up and you step into the room you inhabited yesterday. You wear the same thoughts like a suit of armor. You walk the same corridors of logic. You revisit the same portraits of your past failures. By doing so, you reinforce the walls of that room, making them thicker, more solid, and more real. You are literally building your own prison, brick by brick, with the mortar of your own attention. If we recursively analyze this, why is the state of consciousness so seductive? It is because a state is an identity. To change your room is to risk the death of the version of you that resided there. If you are the person who always fails, moving into the room of the person who thrives requires you to dismantle the narrative that has sustained your ego for years. You are not just changing your mind, you are changing your soul's residence. How do we break this cycle? Through the cultivation of a detached awareness. You must become the detective of consciousness. This requires a shift in perspective. You must learn to view your current state not as you, but as a place you are visiting. When you say, "I am angry," you are trapped. When you observe, "I am currently occupying the room of anger," you have created space. You have stepped back from the wall. You are now the observer of the room, which means you are no longer the same as the room. And once you are the observer, you have the freedom to walk out the door. In the high mountains of the northern kingdoms, there lived a hermit named Kalen. For 20 years, Kalen had lived in a small stone hut near the summit. He believed his hut was the only place where he could find enlightenment. He tended to his small hearth, swept his stone floor, and watched the world from his singular, narrow window. He was convinced that the cold wind, the sparse rations, and the isolation were the necessary conditions for his spiritual advancement. He was in the state of the ascetic. One day a traveler arrived, a man with dust on his boots and laughter in his eyes. He stopped at Kalen's hut and asked for a place to rest. They shared a meal of dry bread and water, and as the fire died down, the traveler spoke of the valleys below of orchards, heavy with fruit, of warm rivers that flowed like liquid emeralds, and of libraries filled with the wisdom of the ages. Kalen shook his head. "I cannot leave this hut. This is the place of my discipline. This is where I am." The traveler looked at the small, dark room, then at Kalen. "You believe this hut is a temple, Kalen, but look at your hands. They are frostbitten. Look at your eyes. They are dim from the lack of light. You have turned a shelter into a tomb, and you call it destiny." "It is all I know," Kalen whispered, a tremor of fear in his voice. The traveler rose and walked to the door. He opened it wide, letting the light of the moon spill onto the cold stone floor. The geography of your world is not determined by the walls you build, but by the doors you choose to leave open. You have been living in the state of the deserted seeker. There is a room called the abundant witness. It is not across the mountain. It is just on the other side of your own decision. The traveler left, but he left the door open. Kalen sat in the dark for 3 days. He was terrified. He felt that if he left his hut, he would lose his identity as the ascetic. But the light through the open door grew brighter with every passing sunrise. Finally, on the 4th morning, Kalen stood. He didn't pack his belongings. He left them behind, for they belonged to the hut, not to the man he was becoming. He stepped out of the hut and into the mountain air. He did not find a different world. He found the same world, but his eyes were now adjusted to the light. He walked not as a hermit, but as a man who had moved into the room of the infinite traveler. The mountains were no longer obstacles to his discipline. They were part of the landscape of his liberation. He had not changed his location. He had simply moved his consciousness out of the tomb of his old identity. The geography of your consciousness is the ultimate frontier. You are currently dwelling in rooms that were decorated by your past, by the expectations of your parents, the trauma of your failures, and the limitations of your own past assumptions. To live consciously is to become the curator of this mansion. Today, your practice is the threshold exercise. As you move through your day, treat every transition as a doorway. When you finish a task and begin another, or when you leave your home to enter your office, stop at the threshold. Consciously pause. Ask yourself, what state am I leaving behind, and what state am I choosing to occupy in the room I am about to enter? If you are entering a room of conflict, do not carry the room of struggle with you. Mentally wipe your feet at the door. Decide, before you step across that threshold, that you are entering the room of equilibrium. Bring the stillness with you. If you are entering a space where you usually feel small, consciously choose to enter the room of authority. Do not allow your momentum to carry you into old, undesirable rooms. Your power lies in the pause at the door. You are the master of this estate. Start reclaiming your rooms today. Like and subscribe if you are ready to stop wandering the halls of your past and begin living in the master suite of your potential. But be warned, as you begin to renovate the interior of your mansion, you will face the ghost of the old room. There is a specific psychological phenomenon where your past reality will try to reclaim you, manifesting as a sudden, intense urge to return to your old habits, your old fears, and your old limited perspective. It is the final defense mechanism of the ego. Why does this ghost appear precisely when you are on the verge of your greatest expansion, and how can you banish it without engaging in a war that only feeds its existence? The next chapter is not for the faint of heart. It is the chapter of the art of redirection. We will learn how to walk away from the ghosts without ever looking back. The house is waiting. Are you ready to take the keys? The winter wind howls against the iron gates of a forgotten garden, a desolate place where the statues are shrouded in tangled ivy and the fountains have long since run dry. A man stands in the center of this overgrown space, his hands clenched into fists, his teeth gritted. He is screaming at the statues. He is demanding that the stone figures move, that the dead fountain flow with crystal water, and that the suffocating ivy retreat from the paths he wishes to tread. He is red in the face, his veins bulging, his entire being poured into the Herculean task of forcing the past to become the future. He believes that his rage is an act of power. He believes that by fighting the decay, by railing against the broken stone and the choking weeds, he is demonstrating his commitment to life. But the garden does not hear him. The statues do not soften. They only seem to grow colder, more rigid in their silence. The harder he fights, the more his own energy is depleted, leaving him gasping in the freezing air, his face mirrored in the dull, cracked surface of a stagnant pool. The paradox of our struggle is precisely this. We attempt to conquer the unwanted by feeding it our own lifeblood. We look at our bank accounts, our strained relationships, our failing health, and we declare war. We fight the room of worry with the same intensity we would use to storm a fortress. We analyze, we agonize, we argue, we berate ourselves for our shortcomings. We think we are solving the problem, but we are only deepening our residency in the very room we wish to vacate. True power does not live in the fist, it lives in the pivot. It does not live in the argument, it lives in the departure. The garden does not need to be conquered, it only needs to be left behind. Why do we insist on demolishing the house we occupy when we could simply turn the handle of a different door? To master the art of redirection, one must first recognize the fundamental psychological error of our age, the belief that what you resist, you overcome. This is the great lie of the ego, a trap designed to keep the consciousness tethered to the very frequency it wishes to transcend. Why does resistance fail so catastrophically? Because resistance is not an act of separation, it is a profound act of engagement. When you resist a state of lack, you are acknowledging that lack as a sovereign power. You are focusing the laser-like intensity of your attention upon the thing you despise, and in doing so, you are feeding it the very energy it requires to persist. You are saying, I am the one who fights the lack, which keeps you firmly embedded in the state of the fighter against lack. You are, by definition, an inhabitant of the room of lack. How does the mechanism of redirection truly function? It operates through the principle of selective focus, or what the ancients called the turning of the mind. The mind, by nature, is a directional instrument. It cannot simultaneously hold two disparate frequencies with equal intensity. You cannot be fully inhabiting the state of abundant security while you are actively, furiously analyzing the state of scarcity. Let us apply recursive thinking. Why is it so difficult to redirect? Because the ego equates attention with managing reality. We fear that if we stop staring at our problems, they will somehow grow teeth and consume us. We believe that our constant, fretful monitoring is what keeps the world from descending into chaos. This is the ultimate hubris. The world does not need your management. The field of existence is self-regulating. It only needs your direction. How do you redirect without creating conflict? You must adopt the posture of the gentle traveler. When you find yourself in the room of worry, you do not need to burn the house down. You do not need to justify your departure. You do not need to prove that worry is irrational or sinful. You simply notice, I am in the room of worry, and you turn toward the door. You walk out. You do not look back. You do not offer an apology to the furniture. You simply cross the threshold into the room of peace, and you start to live there. Redirection is not the suppression of the unwanted, it is the elevation of the preferred. It is the realization that the unwanted does not need to be fixed. It simply needs to be starved of your awareness. In the maritime city of Oros, there lived a legendary navigator named Elara. She was known not for her maps, but for her ability to guide ships through the most treacherous, fog-choked straits in the empire. Other captains feared the fog. They spent their journeys frantically charting the rocks they knew were there, obsessing over the potential for shipwreck. They fought the mist with lanterns, with shouting, with elaborate, futile navigation charts. Most of them hit the rocks. Elara had a different method. She never looked at the fog. She never spoke of the rocks. She sat at the helm, closed her eyes, and tuned her senses to the distant, steady chime of the lighthouse that stood on the far shore. She didn't fight the fog. She simply refused to let it determine her course. She allowed the fog to exist. It was, after all, a natural phenomenon. But she held the state of the arrived in her heart. One evening, her ship was caught in the worst storm of the century. The crew was panicked. They pointed to the rising swells, the jagged cliffs emerging like teeth from the spray, and the encroaching darkness. They begged her to focus on the dangers. "Look at the waves," they cried. "Look at the destruction we are sailing toward." Elara did not look. She stayed at the helm, her hands light on the wheel, her face turned toward the invisible promise of the lighthouse. She occupied the state of the navigator who had already cleared the straits. She felt the ship already in the harbor, the salt spray already washing away the tension of the journey. She turned the wheel not to avoid a rock, but to steer toward the beacon, and a miracle happened. The ship seemed to glide through the channels as if guided by an unseen hand. Where there should have been a collision, there was a passage. Where there should have been disaster, there was a sudden, calm opening. When they reached the harbor, the crew was trembling. They asked her, "How did you avoid the rocks? How did you navigate the dark?" Elara laughed. "I did not navigate the dark," she said. "The dark is a distraction. I navigated the light. The rocks only exist for those who are searching for them. My eyes were on the destination, so the destination opened a path." Elara's success wasn't due to her skill in fighting the storm. It was due to her mastery of the redirection. She had redirected her consciousness from the problem of the storm to the presence of the harbor. The art of redirection is the highest form of discipline. It is the ability to maintain your gaze on the light when the world around you is engulfed in shadows. Today, you are to practice the pivot of presence. Whenever you feel the weight of a problem, whether it is a financial shortfall, a strained relationship, or a personal insecurity, do not fight it. Do not analyze why it is happening. Do not try to solve it with the same mind that created it. Instead, perform the pivot. Ask yourself, if this problem were already solved, How would I feel right now? Feel the physical sensation of that solved state. Let the relief wash over you. If you are struggling with money, feel the quiet, unremarked sense of sufficiency. If you are struggling with a relationship, feel the warmth of the connection you desire. Dwell there. When the problem intrudes, do not fight it. Simply observe it as a fading echo and turn your attention back to the frequency of the solution. You are not suppressing the problem. You are simply choosing a higher floor in the mansion of your consciousness. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You are now learning to navigate the fog, and you will need the beacon of these reminders to keep your focus sharp and your course true. But there is a final, subtle danger in this practice. As you become adept at redirection, you may find that the world begins to cooperate with you in surprising ways. It is tempting, in these moments, to look for the cause of your success in the outer world, to credit the circumstances instead of the state. This is the trap of the externalized reward. If you mistake the shifting mirror for the source of your power, you will become dependent on the reflection once again. Why is it so vital to maintain the distinction between the operant power and the objectified result? And what happens when the reflection finally catches up to the intensity of your inner state? We move now to the penultimate stage of our journey, the crucible of persistence. We are about to witness the true alchemy of the spirit. Are you ready to see the reflection finally transform? Picture a grand ballroom, the air crystalline and still, suspended in the amber glow of 1,000 candles. The guests move with the choreographed elegance of a clockwork mechanism, their silks rustling like dry leaves against the polished marble floor. To the uninitiated eye, this is a gathering of individuals, each contained within the boundaries of their own skin, their thoughts a private, impenetrable sanctuary. But observe the unseen. There is an atmospheric pressure in this room, a collective climate that shifts with the rhythm of the music and the mood of the assembly. A man enters a titan of industry, a man whose presence is a sudden, sharp intake of breath for everyone in his orbit. He carries no weapon, utters no command, yet the room noticeably bends. Those near him find their laughter becoming brittle. They begin to straighten their posture and glance at their watches with sudden, unearned urgency. A few minutes later, a woman drifts in a poet whose internal world is one of soft, luminous peace. As she glides through the crowd, the tension evaporates. Shoulders drop, smiles reach the eyes, and a quiet, unexpected warmth blooms in the conversations around her. They have not spoken. They have not exchanged a single word of instruction. Yet, the entire ballroom has been rewritten by their presence. This is the great, unspoken truth of the human experience. We are not isolated islands of consciousness. We are permeable membranes, constantly exhaling our internal weather and inhaling the climate of others. We think we are reading the people around us, when in truth, we are being infected by their states. We believe we have agency over our own moods, but we are essentially weather vanes, spinning madly in the invisible winds of the collective consciousness. The state you inhabit is not your own private business. It is a broadcast that invites the world to play its part in your narrative. To grasp the contagion of state, one must recognize that consciousness is not a container, but a field. It is a shared, interconnected ocean of awareness, and every ripple you create in the center of your own being inevitably reaches the farthest shores of your reality. Why does your inner state exert such a profound influence on the people around you? It is because the subconscious mind, the ancient reptilian architecture of our being, is a hypersensitive antenna. It is perpetually tuned to the frequency of the other. It recognizes the signature of a state before the conscious mind can form a single thought. When you walk into a room, you are not just a body, you are a signal. You are broadcasting your assumptions about yourself and your relationship to those present. If you assume you are a person to be disregarded, your energy, the micro-tremors in your voice, the way you occupy space, the set of your jaw tells the world, treat me as unimportant. And the world, ever obedient, obliges. How does this contagion operate on a philosophical level? It operates through the principle of reflective resonance. Others are not independent agents reacting to you. They are participants in the field you are actively generating. You are the conductor of the orchestra of your life. Every person you encounter is an instrument. They will play exactly the note that your state demands of them. If you are vibrating with the frequency of fear, you evoke the defensive note in others. If you are vibrating with the frequency of trust, you evoke the cooperative note. Let us apply recursive thinking. Why do we blame others for their treatment of us? Because we believe in the myth of the separate self. We think that their behavior toward us is their own, originating from their own history and character. But if we dig deeper, we find that the behavior they exhibit in your presence is often a specific reaction to the state you are projecting. You are the co-author of their performance. How can this be reconciled with personal responsibility? By realizing that you have the power to change the entire play by changing your character. If you change your state, the root assumption of how you relate to others, the people around you must pivot. They have no choice. They are part of the field, and the field is the shadow of your consciousness. To change the world is not to lobby the actors, it is to rewrite the script of your own inner state. In the great administrative capital of the empire, there lived an overseer named Marcus. He was responsible for the productivity of a massive guild of artisans. For years, Marcus had been defined by a singular, rigid state, the suspicious taskmaster. He believed that people were naturally lazy, that they required the lash of his critique to perform, and that every success was a fluke that would inevitably lead to a failure. His guild was a graveyard of ambition. The artisans worked with heads bowed, eyes averted, their movements sluggish and resentful. They cheated on their hours, they made errors out of spite, and they lived in a state of constant, low-grade warfare against his authority. Marcus would pace the floor, his brow furrowed, his voice sharp with accusation. "See," he would grumble to his assistant, "I knew it. They are uninspired, incapable, and entirely beneath their potential." The more he looked for incompetence, the more he found it. The more he expected betrayal, the more he invited it. One evening, after a particularly disastrous day where a critical contract had been bungled, Marcus was visited by a mentor, a man of deep, quiet wisdom, who had once overseen the entire empire's trade. The mentor sat in Marcus's office and watched the artisans through the window. "Marcus," he said, "do you think you are watching their nature, or are you watching the reflection of your own suspicion?" "They are what they are," Marcus retorted. "I have no choice but to manage their weakness." "You are not managing them," the mentor said. "You are manufacturing them. You are radiating a frequency of doubt and condescension. You are telling them with every vibration of your being that you expect them to fail. And because they are human, and humans are mirrors, they are confirming your suspicion to ensure their own survival. You are the source of the rut." Marcus, in a fit of pride and desperation, decided to test the mentor's word. He didn't tell the artisans anything. He didn't change his policy. He simply changed his state. He began to sit in his office for an hour each morning, breathing in the feeling of gratitude. He imagined, with searing detail, that he was the leader of a team of masters. He felt the pride of their talent. He heard the rhythm of their confident productivity. He saw their eyes, alive with the joy of creation. He lived in the state of the revered leader. The change began within 3 days. It was not a grand, theatrical shift, but a subtle, creeping contagion. The artisans, sensing the absence of his suspicion, began to straighten. They no longer felt that a master carver, previously known for his sluggishness, brought a design to Marcus not out of obligation, but out of a sudden, renewed sense of ownership. Within a month, the guild had become the most productive in the capital. The artisans had not changed. Their potential had merely been unlocked because Marcus had finally stopped broadcasting the frequency that kept them small. He had realized that he was the temperature of the room, and he had chosen to turn the heat up. The contagion of state is a heavy responsibility, but it is also your greatest weapon. Your state is a psychic radio wave, constantly informing everyone around you how they should behave toward you. If you are tired of the way the world treats you, you must change the frequency of your broadcast. Your practice for today is the radiance audit. When you enter a room today, be it a meeting, a dinner, or even a conversation with a spouse, before you speak a single word, stop for 3 seconds. Check your broadcast. What are you radiating? Are you radiating a need for validation? Are you radiating a quiet expectation of conflict? Shift your state before you shift your position. Intentionally step into the frequency of the person who is already respected, already loved, already capable. Feel that state as a literal vibration in your chest. Wear that state like a cloak. Then, walk into the room. Do not observe the people. Observe the reaction of the people to the new signal. You will be astonished at how quickly the ballroom of your life reorganizes itself to match the tune you have chosen to play. Like and subscribe not to follow a guide, but to signal your commitment to becoming the master of the field. But be careful. There is a profound threshold approaching. As you master the ability to evoke reactions from others, you will find yourself standing before the final, most deceptive gate of all, the crucible of persistence. The world will eventually give you what you want, but often it will try to offer you a replica of your desire, a counterfeit state that mimics the form but lacks the substance. How do you distinguish between the genuine manifestation of your inner state and the hollow, fleeting shadows that the world casts to test your resolve? We are moving into the deep, alchemical waters of the final chapters. The signal is strong, but the noise of the world is about to get very loud. Are you prepared to stay true to the frequency, even when the mirror tries to trick you? In the heart of the great desert, there exists a phenomenon known to the nomadic tribes as the shadow day. It is a moment of intense, blinding clarity where the heat waves dance upon the horizon, creating the mirage of an oasis that promises relief to the parched traveler. To the weary, it looks like salvation. The emerald shimmer of palms, the cool glint of water, the promise of an end to the unrelenting sun. But the nomad knows a chilling truth. If one runs toward the mirage, it retreats. If one stops to drink of it, they find only burning sand and the mocking silence of the dunes. The mirage is not a trick of the world, it is a trick of the eye, a projection of the traveler's own desperate thirst onto the canvas of the desert. Now, consider the life of a seeker standing on the threshold of a great transformation. You have set your internal dial to a new frequency. You have walked out of the room of your old identity. You have declared your new I am with the authority of a king, and yet, for a moment, the world does not change. In fact, it seems to push back. The creditors call. The relationship remains fractured. The body persists in its discomfort. This is the crucible of persistence. It is the sensory desert where the old reality attempts to maintain its grip, not because it is real, but because it possesses the momentum of your past declarations. Most souls reach this point and, terrified by the lack of immediate physical evidence, turn back. They mistake the final, dying throes of their old self for the failure of their new one. They believe they have been lied to, when in reality, they have simply reached the testing ground of their own conviction. The crucible is not a place of punishment. It is a forge, designed to burn away the remaining attachments to the life you are no longer meant to lead. To survive the crucible, one must understand the anatomy of manifestation and the terrifying gap between the internal assumption and the external manifestation. Why is there an interval of time, a delay between the change of your internal state and the visible change in your circumstances? Philosophically, this is the time required for the field to reorganize itself. If the world were a reactive, instantaneous mirror, it would be impossible to live. Every fleeting thought would manifest as a chaotic storm. This delay is a mercy. It is a buffer of protection. It allows you the grace to refine your assumptions, to steady your frequency, and to anchor your identity before the world catches up. How does this crucible operate? It utilizes the mechanism of recursive testing. The moment you commit to a new state of being, the field of existence presents you with a series of reflections that demand you choose. Will you trust the invisible, or will you trust the visible? Let us apply recursive thinking. Why does the world appear to contradict your new state so aggressively during this phase? It is because the old momentum is still playing out in the physical realm. Your physical life is a lagging indicator. Like the light of a star that continues to shine long after the star has died, your current circumstances are the radiant energy of the state you used to occupy. You are walking through the sunset of your past. How does one navigate this without losing faith? One must develop the discipline of the unseen. The goal is to reach a state of internal completion so profound that the absence of external evidence becomes irrelevant. You must reach a point where you can say, "I have already received it," and mean it with such physical certainty that the world's no sounds like the muttering of a distant, irrelevant stranger. The crucible is the point where most people pivot back to the state of the wanting. When you want, you are broadcasting a frequency of not yet. When you have, you are broadcasting a frequency of it is done. Persistence is the act of maintaining the frequency of it is done in the face of a world that screams not yet. This is not denial. This is the highest form of spiritual governance. You are deciding which world is real, the world of shadows that is fading, or the world of light that you are calling into being. There was once a young architect in a decaying kingdom who was commissioned to build the greatest bridge the world had ever seen. The king provided the materials, but the people were cynical. They looked at the mud, the chaos, and the centuries of stagnation, and they laughed at the architect. "There is no bridge," they said. "There is only the river of sorrow that has always divided us." The architect did not listen to the people. He retreated to his workshop, and for 3 years, he did not build with stone. He built with intent. He walked the riverbanks every day, not looking at the mud, but seeing the bridge, the elegant, sweeping span of granite and steel rising into the air. He felt the weight of the stone in his hands. He heard the phantom sound of the city's celebration. He lived in the state of the bridge builder so completely that he would often walk to the river and stand in the middle of the water, looking up as if he were walking across the finished path. The people threw rocks at him. The king grew impatient and threatened to banish him. The rain washed away his sketches. The physical evidence, the mud, the lack of support, the ridicule was absolute. Every day, the world told him he was a fool. But the architect persisted. He did not fight the people. He ignored them. He was not building a bridge for them. He was building it for the vision he inhabited. He maintained his internal state with the precision of a clockmaker. He did not allow a single day of doubt to enter his workshop. On the 1000th day, the kingdom faced a great existential threat. The river began to swell, and the city was to be cut off from the grain supplies of the north. Panic reigned. The people cried for a bridge, but there was none. Then the architect walked to the riverbank. He did not build the bridge in a day. He simply stepped into the state of the bridge builder for one final, unified moment of realization. Because he had held that state for 3 years without wavering, the internal frequency had become so dense, so real, that it reached a critical mass. The resources, the workers, and the motivation, which had been lying dormant in the hearts of the people all along, waiting for a signal of absolute conviction, suddenly surged. The bridge didn't just appear, it was summoned forth by the persistent resonance of the architect's state. It was built in a matter of weeks by the very people who had once called him a fool, because his unwavering persistence had shifted the entire atmosphere of the city. The bridge was not a triumph of engineering, it was a triumph of the crucible. The crucible of persistence is not a test imposed by a cruel God. It is a mandatory period of maturation. It is the time required for your inner state to densify until it possesses the gravitational pull to manifest as material fact. Your practice for this phase is the vow of silence. When you are in the midst of your transition, do not speak of your dreams to those who are still tuned to the frequency of the old world. Do not seek validation from the mirror. If you talk about your desire, you are often broadcasting the searching frequency, which reminds you that you don't have it yet. Protect your internal state as if it were a fragile, precious ember in a storm. When the world tries to confront you with its reality, when the bill comes, when the silence lingers, when the rejection hits, do not engage. Simply observe it as a lingering shadow of the past. Remind yourself, this is the fading echo. I am standing in the dawn of a new frequency. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You are navigating the most critical stretch of the journey, and you will need the steady rhythm of this wisdom to keep your heart anchored in the truth. But take heed. There is a final, subtle trap that awaits those who survive the crucible. Once the world finally begins to bend, and your desires start to manifest, you will be tempted to think that you have reached the end. You will be tempted to let your guard down and slip back into the habit of reacting to your success as if it were a gift from the outside world. This is the stage of the architect's vanity. How do you remain the master of the state even when you are rewarded with the treasures of your desire? And what is the ultimate purpose of this power, if not merely to change our own lives? We move now to the final heights of the mountain, where we will discover the secret of the Garden of Seeds. The reality you have built is ready to bloom. Are you prepared to nurture what you have sown? Imagine a vast, silent plain beneath a sky of infinite possibility. Here, the soil is not composed of earth or clay, but of pure, crystalline awareness. A substance so sensitive that it records the vibration of every passing thought. There are no seasons here, no accidental rains, no wild winds that sow seeds without permission. Every inch of this landscape is cultivated, yet it remains hidden from the hurried eyes of the wanderer. In one corner of the plain, the ground is choked with thorned, blackened weeds that pulse with a low, discordant hum. They are dense, aggressive, and suffocating, creating a wall of shadow that prevents the sun from touching the soil. A man stands there, his hands raw from years of trying to pull the thorns, his brow beaded with the sweat of desperate, unceasing labor. He curses the weeds. He prays for a fire to cleanse the land. He blames the soil for its cruelty. He is convinced that the garden is a battlefield, and that he is losing the war. In another corner, a woman stands in a garden of shimmering golden stalks, wheat that glows with an inner light, heavy with grain. She does not labor with the frantic intensity of the man. She moves with a rhythmic, graceful precision. She does not fight the weeds, for there are no weeds to be found. She simply walks, humming a melody of quiet confidence, and wherever she places her feet, life seems to stir in anticipation. The paradox is that the man and the woman are standing on the exact same plane. The soil beneath them is identical. The sky above them is the same. The difference lies not in their effort, but in the nature of the seed they have planted. The man is harvesting the crop of his past, unaware that he is the one who sowed it in the first place. He is living in the consequences of his own unconscious broadcasts. The woman is harvesting the future she consciously designed, aware that the garden has no opinion, no preference, and no morality. It is the most faithful servant a soul could ever possess. And yet, for the man, this servant is a tyrant, because he has left it to be governed by his own forgotten fears. To master the Garden of Seeds, one must transcend the illusion of luck and embrace the cold, crystalline precision of the law. We are taught to view our lives as a series of events. We must learn to view them as a series of harvests. Why does the law of consciousness produce results with such unflinching accuracy? It is because the law is not a judge. It does not possess a moral compass. It does not weigh the deservingness of your desires against your history or your limitations. It operates on the principle of resonance. Whatever state you occupy consistently, whatever seed you plant in the depths of your assumption, must, by the mathematical necessity of the field, produce a harvest of its own kind. How does this occur recursively? We must ask, how can a thought become a thing? It happens through the collapse of potentiality. When you hold an assumption as true at the level of your deepest conviction, you are collapsing the infinite waves of possibility into a single, localized event. You are providing the blueprint. The field provides the bricks. Why do we fail so often? We fail because we sow seeds of confidence in the morning and spend the afternoon watering the weeds of anxiety. We expect the harvest of the confidence, but the weeds are faster. They are familiar. They have a deep, tangled root system in our subconscious. We must understand that planting is not a fleeting wish or a hopeful prayer. Planting is an act of total psychological investment. To plant the seed of abundance, you must assume the identity of the wealthy person, not merely as a role to play, but as the ground you stand upon. Consider the how of this transformation. You must move from external motivation to internal integration. When you plant a seed in this garden, you do not dig it up every hour to see if it has sprouted. That is the quickest way to kill the life within it. You plant it in the quiet, dark, fertile loam of your inner world, and you trust the law. You go about your business, not as someone who is waiting for a sprout, but as someone who is already tending the orchard. The harvest is not a future event. It is an inevitability that has already begun to move toward you. The seed is the end. The harvest is the beginning of the realization. There was once a gardener named Elias who served the royal estates of a great kingdom. The king, intrigued by Elias's ability to produce roses in the dead of winter, asked him for the secret of his success. Elias led the king to the center of the garden and pointed to a single, small wooden box. "My secret, Majesty, is not in the water or the soil," Elias said. "It is in the selection of the seed." Elias then told the king a story of his youth. As a young man, he had worked for a bitter, angry master who believed the garden was a place to be punished. This master would force Elias to plant bitter almond seeds, night black seeds that would grow into twisted, poisonous trees. "These are all the world deserves," the master would say. And indeed, the garden became a place of poison. Elias grew bitter, his life mirroring the toxicity of the trees he was forced to cultivate. One night, Elias made a silent pact with himself. He decided that even if he were forced to cultivate the master's trees, he would save a small patch of soil in the back of the garden for his own seeds. He scavenged for seeds of light, seeds of jasmine, of morning glory, of roses that smelled like the dawn. He planted them in secret. He tended to them with the conviction of a man who was building a different world. When the bitter master finally passed away and Elias inherited the estate, the garden was a strange sight to behold. Half of it was a jungle of twisted, poisonous thorns, and the other half was a paradise of fragrance and light. The townspeople were baffled. They asked him why he didn't simply cut down the thorns. Elias laughed. "Why should I fight the past? I have been planting the future for 20 years. The thorns are simply the evidence of who I used to be. The roses are the evidence of who I have become. I do not need to fight the thorns. I only need to keep planting the roses. Eventually, the thorns will find no space to grow, and they will wither and return to the earth." Elias realized that his life was a garden. He could not erase the mistakes of his youth, but he could change the harvest of his present. By refusing to let the poisonous seeds of his master dictate his current sowing, he became the master of his own fate. He proved that no matter how much bitterness has been planted in the past, the current moment always offers a fresh patch of soil, and the seed you hold in your hand is the only thing that ultimately determines the destiny of your days. The Garden of Seeds is your permanent reality. Every thought you entertain, every emotion you dwell in, and every assumption you make about yourself is a seed that is being carried by the wind into the waiting soil of your future. Your practice today is the gardener's selection. For the next 24 hours, perform a rigorous audit of your thoughts. Whenever you feel yourself about to plant a seed of doubt, frustration, or lack, stop. Visualize yourself holding that thought as a physical object, a seed. Ask yourself, if I plant this seed in my garden, am I willing to eat the fruit it produces? If you are not willing to harvest anxiety, do not plant the seed of worry. If you are not willing to harvest failure, do not plant the seed of inadequacy. Replace the seed with one of capability, abundance, or peace. Plant it firmly, cover it with the soil of your conviction, and walk away. Trust that the garden knows its business. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You are becoming the master cultivator of your own existence, and the rhythm of this garden requires a constant, watchful care. But we have reached the final ascent. We have learned to plant, to tend, and to wait. Yet, there is one final realization that separates the gardener from the god. We have been assuming that we are separate from the garden, that we are the ones who need to do the planting. But what if the gardener and the garden are one and the same? What if the soil itself is an expression of your own divinity? The final chapter approaches, and it will shatter the last, most persistent illusion of all, the illusion of the self that stands apart from the universe. Are you prepared to realize that the one who plants, the seed that is planted, and the harvest that is gathered are all manifestations of a single, eternal power? The final gate is opening. Do you have the courage to walk through? The stage is set in the theater of the infinite, where the play has been running since the dawn of time. Imagine a man sitting in the front row of an empty auditorium, watching a film that flickers with agonizing realism upon the screen. The film depicts his own life, the struggles of his childhood, the triumphs of his youth, the heartbreaks of his middle years, and the creeping fears of his twilight. He watches as the protagonist on the screen faces ruin, weeps in isolation, and triumphs against overwhelming odds. He is so captivated by the narrative that he has forgotten he is the only person in the theater. He has forgotten that he is not the character on the screen, but the one whose consciousness is fueling the projector. He reaches out, his hand trembling, and touches the light beam projecting from the booth behind him. It is warm, luminous, and solid. Suddenly, a vertigo takes hold. He realizes the paradox. If he were merely the character, he would be at the mercy of the script. But if he is the projector, the character is merely a shadow, a temporary manifestation of the light he is casting. The screen is not a source of power, it is an indifferent backdrop that reflects the quality of the light it receives. The dust motes dance in the beam of the projector, tiny, spinning particles that reveal the path of the unseen light. The man stares at his own hands, now translucent in the glow, and sees not flesh and bone, but the energy of creation itself wearing a human face. He is the operant power. He is the one who chooses the real, the one who sets the lens, and the one who determines the clarity of the image. The film is not a memory of what happened, it is an anticipation of what he is currently willing to observe. And in this moment of realization, the film stops. The screen goes white. And in that brilliant, featureless white, the man finds, for the first time, the freedom to be anyone he desires. To realize the truth of the operant power, one must perform a final, radical surgery on the ego. The ego thrives on the concept of becoming, of arriving at a destination that is somehow superior to the current state. The operant power destroys this illusion by revealing that there is nowhere to go, for the one who desires is the one who already contains the fulfillment. Why do we seek to be more or better? It is because we have suffered from the fragmentation of the self. We have convinced ourselves that we are a localized, limited entity, a tiny drop of water that must struggle to reach the ocean. Recursive thinking reveals the truth. The drop is not trying to become the ocean. The drop is the ocean in a localized form. The desire for more is simply the universe expressing its own infinite nature through the narrow straw of a human mind. How does this work? It operates through the collapsing of duality. Duality, the split between the I who wants and the I who has, is the primary obstacle. Why do we maintain this split? Because it creates a sense of meaning. It creates the hero's journey. But the operant power knows that the journey is a dream. The destination is already present. How do we embody this? We stop trying to manifest and start assuming the reality. If we ask why this power is so frequently denied, we find the answer in the fear of the void. To be the operant power is to accept that there is no external authority to blame, no God to beg, and no destiny to fear. It is to sit in the throne of creation and accept the terrifying silence of absolute sovereignty. The operant power is not doing, it is being. When you reach the state of I am, you have closed the gap. You are no longer a participant in the play. You are the playwright, the director, the audience, and the stage itself. You are the source that is experiencing its own expression. There is no separation. There is only the eternal, present I am that is always defining, always creating, and always manifesting through the medium of the mind. In the high, snowy peaks of the Himalayas, there was a temple known to the locals as the Hall of the Thousand Mirrors. It was said that if a seeker traveled to the summit and sat in the center of the hall, they would see the face of the ultimate truth. A young student, ambitious and filled with questions, made the arduous journey. He reached the Hall of the Thousand Mirrors, and as he stepped into the center, he was overwhelmed. He saw himself reflected 1,000 times. He saw his own face, his own fear, his own ambition, his own confusion. He began to run from mirror to mirror, trying to find the one that showed the truth. He looked for a face that was enlightened, a face that was divine, a face that looked like the ancient masters he had studied. He searched until he collapsed in the center of the room, panting and broken. He looked up, and in every single mirror, he saw only a man who was exhausted and crying. He finally gave up. He stopped searching. He stopped comparing. He stopped looking for a reflection that was better than the one he had. In that moment of total surrender, the mirrors did something strange. They began to blur. The images of the student melted into the images of the mountains outside, then into the images of the stars, and finally into a pure, shimmering light that seemed to emanate from the very center of his own chest. He realized that the mirrors were not there to show him a reflection. They were there to show him that he was the source of the light that made the reflections possible. He was not the man in the mirror. He was the one who was witnessing the man in the mirror. He was the consciousness that allowed the mirrors to exist at all. He realized that he could walk out of the hall and never return because he carried the hall within him. He was the operant power. He was the light that could cast any shadow, the consciousness that could assume any form, and the truth that needed no reflection to be real. He walked down the mountain not as a student who had found an answer, but as a master who had realized that he was the question, the answer, and the silence in between. The journey of these 10 chapters has not been a path toward a new destination. It has been a gradual stripping away of the illusions that hid your own power from your view. You are not the person who started this manuscript. That person was a traveler in search of a map. You are now the one who realizes that you are the map, the terrain, and the explorer. To embody the operant power, you must practice the suspension of belief. For the rest of your days, whenever you look at your circumstances, remember the man in the theater. Remind yourself, this is a projection. Whatever you see, the beauty, the pain, the abundance, the lack is a manifestation of a previous state. Do not react to it. Do not define yourself by it. Simply observe it with the detached, majestic gaze of the one who knows their own power. Choose your next projection with deliberate, divine intent. Inhabit the state of your highest vision as if it were the only reality you have ever known. Do not wait for the mirror to change. Change the light, and the mirror will follow. You are the source. You are the power. You are the I am. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You have reached the end of the beginning. You have the keys, the map, and the power. The world is waiting for you to walk out of the theater and start writing the next chapter of your own existence. But be warned, the most profound adventure is not in the manifestation of things, but in the evolution of the one who manifests them. We are entering a new dimension of existence where the boundaries of the self will dissolve entirely, leaving only the pure, radiant energy of the creative spirit. We have reached the summit of the mountain, but the sky above is infinite. The story never ends. It only begins to expand. Go forth and create, for the universe is not watching. It is participating through you. We will speak again in the silence of your own realization. Farewell, architect. The light is in your hands.